Hello, my name is Father James Lee Walker. And first of all, let me welcome you to my home. Our rector, Mother Kate Kress, had lunch with me one day in my home and noticed that I collect a lot of liturgical items. It's been a habit of mine going back to right after when I was ordained. And she asked me if I would do a video inviting y'all into my house and let you see some of the examples of what I'm talking about. Because while none of the pieces that I have are of particular value, many of them are sort of unusual, and most Episcopalians, most Christians, haven't always had a chance to see them. What we're going to do is I'll show you a few examples, but before I do, let me show you an example of one of the most common things that I have here in my home. By the way, I'm wearing my mask. I thought to myself it'd probably look better and people could see me better if I didn't have my mask on, but then I remembered I've got a friend who's holding a camera about 4 or 5 feet in front of me, and the masks are signs of respect and support to each other, and that's why I've got mine on inside the house today. This behind me is a modern contemporary example, probably from the 60s, of what is called a monstrance. Now, that has nothing to do with the English word monster or monstrance. It comes from a Latin word, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly in Latin, monstare, M-O-N-S-T-A-R-E, which in Latin means to show or to exhibit. Our word demonstrate is based on the same base word monstare. The reason that they're called that is in this little circle here, and I'll show you more of an example of it later, is a small container called a luna. And it's called that because most of the monstrances that you'll see in the church have some form of a sunburst. And inside is the luna, which is a reflection of the sun. So the outside represents symbolically the glory and the majesty of Christ, and the luna reflecting that holds the blessed wafer, the host from the Mass. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later. Let me say a word about how we come to have monstrances. They didn't exist until about the end of the 13th century, and then in very sort of rudimentary forms. Now, I can't explain all of it just in a few minutes, but for various historical reasons during the 13th century, the people in the Western Church more and more began to practice prayers in the church, in the section of the church where the reserved sacrament is kept. And by reserved sacrament, we mean bread and wine that has been consecrated at a celebration of the Holy Eucharist or the Mass. The people would come there because it was the church's earthly, most vibrant and majestic symbol of the presence of God in the created world. I'm having trouble with my mask keeping it on there. The people would come and they would usually do an hour's time of prayer called a holy hour. And where that comes from is when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane having prayer, and his 3 disciples were to keep watch with him, but they kept falling asleep. And he says to them, "Could you not watch with me for 1 hour?" And during the 13th century, the custom developed in answer to that question of spending 1 hour in prayer in front of the consecrated bread and wine where it was kept in the church. During the 13th century, the clergy began to develop services at the request of the people where they would put out on the altar the various containers that hold the consecrated bread and wine, which would usually be a simple flask and a small metal or wooden container with the bread. Then, for various reasons, over time, they began to develop more elaborate and, most importantly, larger containers that could be seen by the people because whole services began to gather around this. Today, we have a service called Benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. Very short, about 15 minutes, but it's composed of chanting, the most lavish vestments that the church has, many extra candles being lit, incense, It's the shortest and one of the most ceremonial and just glorious kind of services known in the church, at the height of which the priest lifts the monstrance with the sacred host in it and makes a sign of God's blessing over the people. It sits on top of this little table, which is called a tabor. This is called a tabor after Mount Tabor in the Holy Land, which is mentioned in the scripture. We know it particularly from the time of the Transfiguration, when Jesus is seen by his followers, 3 of his apostles, on Mount Tabor in the feast, or what we celebrate as the Feast of the Transfiguration. And that's when he is described as being transfigured in his appearance and glowing with radiant light. And because the presence of Christ, as we know it in the consecrated host, is sitting on this as Christ was on Mount Tabor, it's come to be called a tabor. These are 3 other monstrances I'm going to show you. This one right here is the first one that I ever got. And in a sense, it's kind of why the others started. I got this one at a time in the church's history back in the 70s when it was still about 10, 12 years post-Vatican Council II, and a lot of the Roman Catholic churches were stopping the use of these and either selling them or giving them away. Our church borrowed this one, St. Christopher's in Fort Worth, to use on Maundy Thursday for the altar of repose. And when I called the priest at the church that had loaned it to us, he said they weren't using it anymore and for me to just keep it. So I have, and since then, so many people have either told me about one that's available in a junk shop or somewhere or on eBay, or churches that I know that have given them to me that are not using them. This one right here is an exact copy of the one from Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. However, the one in Paris is made of gold, silver, and ivory. This one's made of brass, aluminum, and bakelite plastic from the 1930s. This is the Luna I had mentioned before. It's a little container that opens up. The host is placed in there, a priest's host, which is slightly larger than the people's host. That's closed and it's put back here in the small window. And get the clamp on it. This is one also from, I'd say, probably the 1930s. Like most monstrances, it either has St. Mary holding up the sunburst or one of the saints, often the patron saint of the parish that gets it. And this is another such example. These 3 up here on top of the curio case I got when I was visiting a Roman Catholic parish in Fort Worth, Texas. I was sitting in the office talking to the priest, and I happened to notice those 3 lying in a trash can upside down next to his desk. And I told him, I said, do you know that those 3 monstrances have fallen off into the trash can? He said, we don't use them anymore, and I can't give them away, so I'm throwing them away. And I said, no, I'll take them, and that's how they ended up on my curio case. And here we'll walk in now and see a few other examples. Up here, along these cases, are examples of some other monstrances. Most of these are probably from the 40s, 50s, 60s. A few of them are newer than that. Just a couple of them. This one right here is probably out of the 30s, a very inexpensive one. But again, the stem is made of bakelite. And I keep pointing that out because back in the 1930s, you only saw that on toaster handles and things like that. But it showed up on quite a few monstrances from that time. This one right here and this one right here are the only 2 I have that are principally made of wood. They're usually made of metal, but they're unusual in that sense. And these were almost mass produced. This one right here and these down here. I've seen those in so many, many different churches. Then there's also, if you can, these wood carvings up here that are mounted to the wall are the Stations of the Cross. For any who are not familiar with that, they came to us, we're not sure exactly how, but the most probable theory is when people went to visit in the Holy Land, particularly quite soon after the resurrection of Christ, it was commonplace for the friends that they had in Jerusalem to take them and say, this is where Pilate condemned him to death, this is where he fell under the weight of the cross the first time, and so forth. And the custom came of having what are called 14 stations, each depicting different events from the time he was condemned till he was hung and died on the cross until he was laid in his tomb. Back here underneath my stairs is a collection of mostly what are called tabernacles, after the tabernacle in the wilderness that the Ark of the Covenant was about. This is a tabernacle, as is the silver one next to it, the big ornate wooden and brass one down at the end, and others. That is where the Blessed Sacrament, the bread and the wine, is kept in some churches, either there or in a similar looking container, but one mounted into the wall, which is called an aumbry. I also have along here quite a collection of thuribles, which are the containers in which the incense is burned at Mass, and some other candlesticks. These are all sanctuary lamps that are hanging here. A candle is kept burning in front of the consecrated bread and wine, wherever it is kept in the tabernacle in the church. I'll show here on the side. This is a little electric griddle. The temperature control up here, and the camera's probably going to have to come around over this way to be able to see it. You'll see the designs here. That's the design for the large priest host, and all these little ones around here for the people's host. The lines down here are what make a line down the center of this host for the priest to easily break it in two, and the little triangle that he dips into the chalice, which is made here. Literally, these were just griddles, and they were made much like griddling a waffle, except much more quickly. I just showed you the griddle downstairs for making communion hosts. This is even older than that, goes back to probably somewhere in the 1800s. It was for making the very large host that the priest uses. The way these were used for making the host is they'd simply go to the fireplace, they would set the griddles into them, heat them up to the proper temperature, pour a pancake-like batter on them made out of wheat flour, and close them and very quickly open them up again. That was long enough to cook them, cut the round hosts out of them, and they were ready to use with all of the religious imagery printed on them. It's a little awkward shot through the glass here, but you can see spread out here are some small vestments. And these are vestments used principally in the Roman Catholic Church, but you'll see them occasionally in the Anglican, to dress or vest statues for feast days. This one down here, it has something written on it in Portuguese, which I don't read and don't know exactly what it says, but it's one for the Virgin Mary. Then there's a little white one, which usually is on figures of the infant Jesus. And up here on the bottom, you can see a very heavily jeweled one with a big white middle part. And you see a hole in it up towards the top. That's not a flaw in the fabric. That's where one of the arms of the baby Jesus comes through, holding the globe that represents the earth. It's usually used on a statue of Jesus that is called the Infant of Prague. And then over here across, these are two Stations of the Cross. They hung in my parents' house for years, back when I was in elementary school. And I've got 3 of them. Those are 2 of them hanging over there. I just brought you up here a couple of things that I've got here that are from my parents' house also. These statues, this one is of Christ and this one of the Virgin Mary. I've got others of them around the house. They're called santos, and they're just little folk art. The local people carve them out of wood. These are probably 100 years old or so. You can see one of the hands is broken off of the Christ over here, and he's lost his halo. But my mom and dad were very fond of those, and they'd pick them up in little junk shops all the time. But back then, people, once they got scratched, didn't want them anymore, and now they're hard to find. This is used to be my breakfast room in here, and put some cabinets in. And this is where I keep a lot of the other monstrances that I've got, as you see, quite a few. And I'll point out a couple of them to you here. There's one back in here. I got this from South America, down in Peru, on eBay of all places. They always have a lot of them on there. The reason I'm showing it to you, two things. It is probably from a small church somewhere down in Peru, I believe this one came from, named St. Mark's. It has the lion of St. Mark up here. This is one that would be used to carry in procession. The top comes off to make it lighter. And it would be processed on festival days as a sign of God's presence throughout the world. But it's also interesting. I'm assuming this was a fairly poor parish. If you look at it, it's made of different kinds of metals and different kinds of things. I may be wrong, but up here at the top, where you open it to get inside to put the consecrated host in the luna, I think all of this part around here is from an outdoor, like, porch light. I'm not sure about this. This looks like it was more tooled for this purpose. And this looks like a base to a lamp down here. I've got a couple of others. This one right here. I know this is from a lamp, an outdoor lamp, and the base is from a table lamp. And this was probably made by someone in the parish that had sufficient skills to know how to put those things together. The one that you can see in the far back there, that's also from South America. That's from Peru. And then this one over here that has the very large sunburst around it, apparently that was really, really popular at the end of the 1800s. You see lots of them online for sale, and they all have the same design and the same style to them. And this is one that's more Art Deco back here with the two angels. And this one right here, this is my favorite. I'm Jungian enough in terms of Carl Jung. I love the concentric circles, but in this case, they're almost oval and egg-shaped with the Christ in the center, the sort of circles of discovery of the universe. And then this one here, it's also used in procession. This top part lifts out because obviously the rest of it down here would be far too heavy to carry. And then in here, what looks to be the monstrance, actually this whole part here and the stand, this is the Tabor. In memory of Mount Tabor, this is the monstrance right here. And I think that's about all that I have to show to you. When I see you at church, I'll be happy to answer any questions I have, and possibly in the future and when you're a guest in my home to be able to explain some of this. God bless you all, and thank you for taking the time to view the video. God bless. Bye.